On a winter night in 1979 at Luna Park, Sydney in New South Wales, Australia, the amusement park ride named Ghost Train suddenly burst into flames. What should have been screams of joy and excitement quickly became screams of complete and utter terror as people trapped inside began to burn alive. The raging fire would ultimately take the lives of 1 adult and 6 children. Over 40 years later, and the mystery of that night has remained unsolved, and even stranger, it has become synonymous with a creepy urban legend. Was the Luna Park fire an accident or arson? And could there be any truth to the paranormal conspiracy theory that has linked this tragedy to the occult? Luna Park, Sydney is an amusement park located in New South Wales, Australia on the northern part of Sydney Harbour. The park was modeled after the success of Coney Island's Luna Park in New York and opened to the public on October 4, 1935.
Before the gates of Luna Park are open to the public, our dedicated staff can be seen working tirelessly in preparation for the day ahead.
A universally recognizable 9-meter wide-mouthed grinning face works as the park's entrance and has become a notorious landmark in Sydney's history. Luna Park became an immediate sensation, and on opening day, crowds of people were lined up under the iconic smiling face that overlooked the park, attracting both locals and tourists alike for its rides, games, and entertainment for all ages. 2 of the most popular rides were the Big Dipper, a wooden roller coaster, and the Ghost Train. On New Year's Eve in 1932, a woman improperly seated in the Big Dipper fell from the ride and died the next day. There were allegations of mechanical failure, but further investigation would suggest that the woman had committed suicide. In 1946, a 33-year-old man was killed on the Big Dipper after he disregarded safety instructions and was thrown from the ride. In April 1979, 13 people were injured when a steel runner broke and halted one of the roller coaster trains. It would be later that same year that Luna Park would see what would become the most horrific and perplexing tragedy in the park's history. During the winter of 1979, a family of 4 parents, John and Jenny Godson, and their 2 young boys, Damien and Craig, traveled from West New South Wales to Sydney for the holidays. They had spent the week there before heading down to the lower North Shore for their final day of sightseeing.
We decided at the last minute that we would all still go to Luna Park because we were going home the next day. And it was probably about 8 o'clock when we arrived at Luna Park that night.
It was the first time Damien and Craig had been to the beach or the ocean. On June 9, 1979, the family took a day trip to the Taronga Zoo, which is located on the shores of Sydney Harbour, with plans to spend the evening at Luna Park. The family was thrilled about their final day of vacation, and after their day at the zoo, they returned to the city for dinner before ending their night at Luna Park. The 2 young boys were ecstatic to go on the rides and experience everything the park had to offer. But just as the family was nearly ready to head home, Damien and Craig asked their father if they could have another ride on the Ghost Train.
We'd only had about 4 tickets left, and we asked the children which ride they enjoyed the most, and they chose the Ghost Train.
Like the roller coaster, the Big Dipper, the Ghost Train was a staple at Luna Park. It was an indoor ride where passengers would board the train car and travel through a labyrinth of dark tunnels.
Yes, there are lots of ghosts in here. You'll shiver and quake, and the Ghost Train.
Inside, the passengers would be surprised by jump scares and special effects, not unlike a haunted house. It was pitch black inside the tunnels, save for fluorescent paints with multiple swinging doors and winding paths. Damien and Craig's parents agreed to one more ride on the Ghost Train. John took the 2 boys and waited in line for the ride, while Mother Jenny went to buy ice cream, a craving that was usual for her. Jenny would have no idea that this would be the last time she would ever see her family alive.
I was from the country. I came down here to share a night with my family, and my whole world just sort of fell to pieces.
Approximately 35 riders boarded the Ghost Train ride. The usual workers weren't present that day, and unbeknownst to the staff, the ride's sprinkler system wasn't working. Originally, Luna Park would close during winter months, and it was during this time that maintenance and repairs on the rides would take place. But from 1969 onward, the park was opened all year round, and while occasional maintenance did continue, it was not as thorough as it once was. It wouldn't be long before riders inside started to notice the distinct smell of something burning and smoke in the air.
We came round the corner to the fireplace, and there was a fire in it.
The ghost train had a fake fireplace as part of the attraction, and it was out of the ordinary to see smoke or other special effects.
3/4 of the way through, there was a fake fire which had ribbons coming out of it with a fan underneath it. So when the fan operated, the streamers would blow upwards with the lights and it would look like a fire. But you could see it wasn't real.
Initially, people dismissed it as part of the ride, but as passengers made their way through the pitch-black maze, some noted that the fake fireplace had what appeared to be real flames inside.
It was just the most natural thing to see. It was a very small fire and a little fireplace that was supposed to be a fireplace, so I didn't question it.
One passenger even ran their hand over it, feeling the heat of the real fire.
The flames just real. And I went over it and I went to touch it. Went like that, and the heat that was coming from it, and I sort of went, whoa, gee, that's real. That just feels like a real fire. It was the heat that has stayed in my memory for all these years. I'll always swear I felt the heat of that imitation fire.
As the ride continued, the wall caught fire. Outside, staff and attendees had no inkling of the chaos ensuing behind the ride's walls. But when the passengers made their way out after completing the ride, they began to notify the workers of the fire. The ghost train staff wasn't sure what to make of it at first, but when clouds of dark smoke billowed from the tunnels, staff and onlookers realized something was very wrong.
The place just went up. People in it now were just, flames were just gushing out and smoke, heavy, like Frank and I were choking just about. Even now I can't breathe properly because the smoke's still in my lungs. The place just went up.
As the first few train cars exited the ride with passengers unscathed, many believed that everyone would emerge from the ride safely. But that wasn't the case. Eventually, the last couple of train cars emerged completely ablaze. By the time Jenny Godson had approached the ride with her ice cream to meet up with her husband and 2 sons, the ghost train was engulfed in a horrifying and raging fire.
And I walked over to the front of the ride, and I could see that they'd already got on the ride without me. And I was just standing there eating my ice cream, and all of a sudden I saw the smoke and the flames.
Terrified screams of those still trapped inside and panicked cries from those watching on filled the night. Firefighters raced to the scene, but upon arriving, they were met with water supply issues. With only small amounts of water trickling out of the hoses, they ended up having to get their water straight from the harbor. When firefighters finally got the fire under control, they made a gruesome and heartbreaking discovery. John and his 2 sons, Damien and Craig Godson, had been trapped inside one of the tunnels and burned alive.
It's been an absolute night of tragedy here at the Luna Park in North Sydney. I sat with a woman most of the evening who cried, was in tears for more than 3 hours before she learned that her 2 children, aged 4 and 6, were dead, and her 29-year-old husband had also perished in this inferno. It's tragic.
4 other boys from the local Waverley College were also found dead. They were visiting the park with a 5th friend who survived the blaze. Days later, and nothing was left of the ghost train except for floorboards, ash, and rubble. The scene was never taped off, and it seemed like there was no preservation at all of the crime scene. Any potential forensic evidence was likely lost and destroyed in that time.
The next day they had bulldozers and cranes just clearing the site. There was no crime scene.
Police were quick to clear the site and quick to explain away the fire to the families by assuring them that it was a terrible accident. But the families of the victims felt that something was amiss.
Talking of God's son, God and his son, the name is so similar to the family who perished. They were the heroes. They were the soldiers of sacrificial lambs.
In the last photograph ever taken of Damien Godson, he is pictured with a man wearing a leopard loincloth and demon mask made of cow skin with horns and black hair. The picture was taken earlier the day of the fire.
And while we were standing there, just out of nowhere, a figure appeared. And Damien was rather frightened and rather taken back when he came up to us. But he just stood there, and this beast-like person put his hand on his shoulder, and I just took the photo.
The man wasn't seen after that and has never been found, but the satanic-like figure has become an Australian urban legend, with many believing that it is proof that the fire could have ties to the occult. The families of the victims were not concerned by the conspiracy theories that followed the tragic deaths of their loved ones. Instead, they focused their attention on how the fire really started. The investigation into the ghost train fire was led by Detective Inspector Doug Knight. Despite the crime scene having never been properly secured and no forensic evidence to help solve the cause of the fire, Detective Doug Knight would go on to live television and publicly declare that the fire was caused by an electrical fault in the building.
We're now satisfied that the fire was as a result of an electrical fault within the building.
The day after the fire, Doug Knight released a written statement stating that the fire had no suspicious origins and that there were 4 independent statements from witnesses who claimed to see sparks and flames in the vicinity of the ghost train's roof, in the electrical wiring system. Ironically, the fuse box that law enforcement claimed was the origin of the fire was the last thing standing after the smoke cleared. The fuse box was still intact the next day, and damage was minimal, making it unlikely that the fire started there.
By far the most dramatic claim of the day came from Dr. Anthony Stokes, Senior Lecturer in Electrical Engineering at Sydney University. In his opinion, there has been no material evidence found yet that prompts him to conclude that electrical failure was responsible for starting the Luna Park fire.
An investigation led by coroner Kevin Anderson would conclude that the most likely cause of the fire was a cigarette butt that may have been carelessly tossed by one of the passengers on the ride. But with no smoking allowed and many witnesses saying they never saw anyone smoking, it seemed unlikely that a cigarette would have caused the massive fire that took the lives of 7 people. Many passengers and first-hand witnesses believe that the fire was no accident, but that instead, it was murder.
They do not want to admit that something so horrific could have been done, that those people could have been burnt alive on purpose. Now, people do not want to believe that.
As recently as 2021, visitors and staff from that day described smelling kerosene and seeing a group of men standing just outside the ride, discussing using kerosene and matches to light a fire.
I was doing my shift on the chip bar that night. I do remember seeing a group of bikies. I distinctly remember this group because they walked around the side of the chip bar and past the front. I remember one of them turning around, sort of smirking, and they were laughing. These were young guys who were thin, leather boots, long hair. They just looked kind of a bit out of place at Luna Park. It was very unusual to see a group like that at the park.
These witnesses would tell police exactly what they saw and smelled, but for unknown reasons, police dismissed the claims and stuck by their theory that the fire was just an accident.
Were you contacted by police?
Never. And I was in the next day. I was upset that I wasn't interviewed. I did have things to say. They were not interested in following up.
Do you think the police have questions to answer?
Yes, they do. Why? Why weren't we called? You could have done it then and there on the spot. Everything was available.
If the fire was a case of arson, then it begs the question, why was law enforcement trying to cover it up?
How confident are you that you smelt burning kerosene inside the ghost train late that night?
12. There's no doubt about it.
The presence of kerosene, that smell that you're 12 out of 10 confident of, what did that point to in terms of how that fire started?
Oh, it suggests that somebody lit the fire.
Years later, one of the victims' mothers would receive a strange phone call from a woman crying on the other end. The woman claimed that she and her friends were meant to meet up with the local schoolboys that perished in the fire that night, but that her father had told her that something was going to occur at Luna Park and forbid her from going. The woman's father was a man named Jack Rooklin. Jack Rooklin was a crime figure and a close associate with Abe Saffron. Abe Saffron was a nightclub owner, property developer, and a major figure in organized crime in Australia. He was involved in a range of criminal activities from drug dealing, illegal gambling, bribing police, extortion, and arson.
Abe Saffron got 3 blokes to start the fire, create the fire.
I'm 100% sure. I believe that he instigated the fire.
Did other people in police agree with you or believe that too?
After the ghost train fire, there was a string of other fires at various establishments. Traces of kerosene were found at each of the sites, and at each location, Abe Saffron had a vested financial interest. Abe also had a slew of corrupt police officers in his back pocket, including Detective Doug Knight. Years before the fire, Doug Knight was criticized for his seemingly close business relationship with Abe's associate, Jack Rooklin. It was well known that Abe Saffron wanted the lease to Luna Park and stood to make a lot of money if he could get his hands on it. Allegedly, Abe had approached Ted Hopkins, Luna Park's owner, with an offer to buy the park. In 1985, 6 years after the fire, Abe had beneficial ownership of the park and was involved in supplying pinball and arcade games to Luna Park. Decades later, Abe Saffron's niece would come forward and point a finger at her uncle for orchestrating the Ghost Train fire. Abe Saffron, on the other hand, adamantly denied the rumors of his involvement until his death in 2006. The lives of the families who lost their loved ones that night were upended and shattered. For Jenny Godson, she lost her entire family in a single night, and the grief of that loss was all-consuming. It took her well over a year to slowly start piecing her life back together again, but much like the other families, she fell into a pit of despair. 7 years after her family perished in the horrible fire, Jenny gave birth to a daughter. Her daughter gave her the strength and hope she needed to carry on with life, as hard as it was. In 1995, a memorial was dedicated to the 7 victims, and in 2004, a plaque listing the names of the victims was placed on an external wall of the Big Top Sydney, which was constructed on the site of where the Ghost Train ride had once stood. Speculation and rumors continue to swirl decades after the Luna Park tragedy. Some are certain that criminals and mobsters were involved, while others believe that maybe it was an accident after all. In 2021, the New South Wales government offered a $1 million reward for anyone that can provide important information on what occurred on the night of June 9, 1979.
I'm delighted that the government has seen fit to offer a $1 million reward. It is appropriate given the public interest in this investigation.
The Ghost Train fire remains one of Australia's most mystifying unsolved mysteries and one of its most devastating catastrophes. For the families, they hope that someday soon they will get answers and justice can be served so they can finally gain a little piece of closure they so desperately need.